The morning fog hung thick over Windsor Great Park when the black Range Rover arrived at the gates of Royal Lodge. It was just past 7 o'clock, and the world was still asleep. But inside that vehicle sat a woman who had waited long enough. Camilla, Queen Consort of England, stared at the iron gates ahead. Her hands were folded in her lap, her jaw set with determination. Beside her, 2 members of the royal household staff exchanged nervous glances. They knew what this visit meant. They knew the orders she had given. "Open the gates," Camilla said quietly. The driver pressed the intercom button. Static crackled through the speaker. Then a voice emerged, rough and tired. "State your business." The driver cleared his throat. "Her Majesty, the Queen Consort, requests entry to Royal Lodge." Silence. Long and heavy. The kind of silence that speaks louder than words. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button now. You won't want to miss what happens next. Inside the gatehouse, a man named Thomas Porter stood with his hand still on the intercom button. He was 62 years old, a former military police officer who had served the crown for nearly 4 decades. He had guarded this entrance for 12 years. He knew every rule, every protocol, every name on the authorized entry list, and he knew the name that wasn't there anymore. Thomas looked out through the small window at the Range Rover, idling in the mist. He could see the royal crest on the door. He could see the faces waiting inside, expecting compliance, expecting obedience. But he also saw the document pinned to the wall beside him, the lease agreement, the legal papers that had been delivered just 2 weeks prior, reinforced by palace lawyers and witnessed by 3 members of Parliament. The keys belonged to the Duke of York. No more changes. No more challenges. Thomas pressed the button again. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "I cannot grant you entry." In the Range Rover, Camilla's eyes widened. Her staff member leaned forward. "I beg your pardon?" the aide said into the intercom. "This is Her Majesty. Open these gates immediately." "The property is leased to His Royal Highness, the Duke of York," Thomas replied. "Under the terms of that lease, I am authorized to admit only those persons approved by the Duke. Your name is not on that list." Camilla's face flushed red. She leaned across the seat herself, her voice sharp. "This is Crown property. I am the Queen Consort. You will open this gate, or you will face consequences you cannot imagine." Thomas felt sweat forming on his palms. Every instinct told him to obey, to bow, to submit. But he had been a soldier once. He understood what orders meant. He understood what duty demanded. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "with all respect, the lease is a legal document. The Duke holds the keys. I have my orders." For a moment, no one spoke. The fog swirled around the vehicle. A bird called somewhere in the distance. Then Camilla sat back, her face white with fury. "We'll see about that," she whispered. The Range Rover didn't move. It sat there at the gate like a predator waiting for prey to make a mistake. Inside, Camilla pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She scrolled through her contacts and pressed a name. The call connected on the second ring. "Need you at Royal Lodge," she said without greeting. 20 minutes later, a second vehicle arrived. This one carried Sir Edmund Hayes, the Lord Chamberlain's deputy and a man who had navigated royal politics for 30 years. He stepped out in his perfectly pressed suit, his face grave. Thomas watched from the gatehouse as Sir Edmund approached. The older man's shoes clicked on the wet pavement. When he reached the intercom, he didn't press the button. Instead, he walked directly to the gatehouse door and knocked. Thomas opened it. The 2 men stood face to face. "Mr. Porter," Sir Edmund said quietly, "you understand the position you're putting yourself in?" "I understand my duty, sir," Thomas replied. "Your duty is to the crown. My duty is to the law. The Duke of York holds a legal lease on this property. That lease was signed by His Majesty King Charles himself. It grants the Duke exclusive residence rights for 75 years. Sir Edmund's expression flickered. Just for a moment. Because Thomas was right. And they both knew it. The lease had been one of the final acts of Queen Elizabeth II before her death. She had wanted to protect her son Andrew, despite everything, despite the scandals and the shame. The Royal Lodge was his sanctuary, his last piece of dignity. and Charles, in his first months as king, had honored his mother's wish. He had signed the papers, made it official. But that was before Camilla began whispering in his ear at night, before she started talking about waste and optics and how it looked to have a disgraced prince. Living in a 30-room mansion while working families struggled. The queen consort has authority? Sir Edmund tried again.
Oh.
She speaks with the king's voice. Then bring me a document that says so, Thomas said. Bring me new papers, signed and sealed, that override the duke's lease. Until then, these gates stay closed. Sir Edmund stared at him. Thomas could see the calculation happening behind the man's eyes. Could he force this? Could he call the police? Claim some emergency? Some override? But they both knew the truth. This wasn't a security issue. Switch politics. And politics, when dragged into the light, becomes scandal. You're making a powerful enemy, sir, Edmund said softly. I've made peace with that, Thomas replied. Back in the Range Rover. Camilla watched the conversation through the window. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read body language. She could see Sir Edmund's shoulders sag slightly, could see him shake his head. Her phone buzzed. A text from Charles. What's happening? She typed back quickly. Obstruction. Minor staff issue, handling it, but it wasn't minor. Now she knew it. Sir Edmund returned to the vehicle and leaned through the window. Ma'am, perhaps we should reassess. Come back with proper documentation. Make this official through the right channels. Camilla's eyes flashed. I am the right channel. With respect, no, she cut him off. No more excuses. No more delays. Andrew has humiliated this family. He doesn't deserve that house. Doesn't deserve any of it. Sir Edmund chose his next words carefully. The law doesn't care what he deserves, ma'am. It cares what's written on paper. Camilla stared at the gates. At the small figure of Thomas Porter standing in the gatehouse, visible through the window. An old man, a nobody, standing between her and what she wanted. She had never been denied before. Not like this. Not so publicly. Even if there were no cameras here, no witnesses beyond her own staff. Driver, she said coldly, take us back to Windsor Castle. As the Range Rover turned and drove away, Thomas watched until it disappeared into the fog. Then his legs gave out and he sat down hard on the gatehouse chair. His hands were shaking. His heart pounded so hard, he thought it might burst. But he had done his duty. For now, inside Royal Lodge. Prince Andrew sat in his study, unaware of what had just happened at his gates. The morning light filtered through tall windows, falling. Across mahogany furniture and walls lined with photographs from better times, he was reading the newspaper when his private secretary, a thin woman named Margaret, knocked softly and entered. Your Royal Highness, she said. I've just received word from Thomas at the gate. There was an incident this morning. Andrew looked up. What kind of incident? The Queen Consort attempted to enter the property. Thomas denied her access. For a moment, Andrew didn't move. Then slowly he set down his newspaper. He did what? Margaret explained everything. The early morning arrival, the demands, the standoff. Andrew listened in silence, his face unreadable. When she finished, he stood and walked to the window. From here he could see the gardens his daughters had played in as children, the paths where his mother had walked during her visits, the home he had lived in for more than 20 years. She wants me gone, he said quietly. It appears so, sir. Andrew turned. Get Thomas on the phone and call my solicitor. 30 minutes later, Andrew spoke with Thomas directly. You understand what you've done? Andrew asked. Yes, sir, Thomas replied. I followed the terms of your lease. They'll come for you. They'll try to have you removed from your post. I know, sir. Andrew was quiet for a moment. This man, this guard he had barely spoken to in 12 years, had just stood up to the Queen Consort, had risked everything to enforce a legal agreement. Why? Andrew asked. Why would you do that? Thomas considered the question. Because the law applies to everyone, sir. Even queens. Even disgraced princes. If we start ignoring legal documents, because they're inconvenient, then nothing means anything anymore. Andrew felt something catch in his throat. Respect, gratitude, emotions he hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," he said simply. But while Andrew made his calls and fortified his legal position, Camilla was doing the same. She sat in her private drawing room at Windsor Castle, surrounded by advisors. Sir Edmund was there, along with 2 royal lawyers and the deputy master of the household. "Explain to me," Camilla said icily, "how a guard can refuse entry to the Queen Consort." The senior lawyer, a woman named Patricia Thornton, spoke carefully. "The lease agreement is ironclad, ma'am. Queen Elizabeth made certain of that. The Duke has exclusive rights to the property for 75 years. He can permit or deny access to anyone, including members of the royal family. That's absurd. It's legally binding." Camilla stood and paced. "So we do nothing? We just accept that Andrew gets to keep a 30-room mansion while the crown needs space for working royals, while William and Catherine need to accommodate their growing household." Patricia exchanged a glance with Sir Edmund. "There may be another approach," she said slowly. "The lease requires the Duke to maintain the property to certain standards. If he fails to do so, the Crown could claim breach of contract." Camilla stopped pacing. "Go on. The Royal Lodge requires significant maintenance. The roof, the plumbing, the electrical systems. Repairs could cost millions. If the Duke cannot afford those repairs, if the property falls into disrepair, we could argue he's violated the terms of his lease." A slow smile spread across Camilla's face. "How much would those repairs cost?" "Approximately £7 million, and Andrew's income? Substantially less than that, ma'am. Without royal duties, his funds are limited." Camilla sat back down. "So we wait. We document every crack, every leak, every problem, and when he can't keep up, we take it." Sir Edmund looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, that could take years." "Then it takes years," Camilla said coldly. "But that house will not remain in Andrew's hands. I promise you that." Back at Royal Lodge, Andrew's solicitor delivered similar news. "They can't evict you directly," the lawyer explained, "but they can make it financially impossible for you to stay. The maintenance requirements alone will drain your resources within 2 years." Andrew felt his stomach sink. "So I lose anyway?" "Not necessarily. If you can find independent funding for repairs, if you can prove you're meeting all obligations, the lease holds." "Where would I get £7 million? The solicitor had no answer. That night, Andrew sat alone in the dark. Outside, Thomas continued his watch at the gate. 2 men, separated by class and circumstance, both fighting the same battle. The battle to be seen, to be treated with basic dignity under the law, and both knew that Camilla was not finished with them. 3 days after the confrontation at the gate. Thomas Porter received a formal letter. It arrived by courier in a cream-colored envelope. Bearing the royal seal, his hands trembled as he opened it. The letter informed him that his employment was under review. Allegations had been made regarding his conduct, specifically his refusal to cooperate with senior members of the royal household. He was to attend a disciplinary hearing in 1 week. Thomas read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. He had expected this. But knowing it was coming didn't make it easier. That evening, he went home to his small cottage on the edge of Windsor. His wife, Mary, took one look at his face and knew. "They're going after you," she said. He nodded and showed her the letter. Mary sat down heavily. They had 3 years until his pension fully vested. 3 years until they could retire comfortably. If he lost his position now, they would lose everything. "Maybe you should apologize," Mary said quietly. "Tell them you made a mistake." Thomas looked at his wife. They had been married for 40 years. She knew him better than anyone. "I didn't make a mistake," he said. "I know," she replied, tears in her eyes. "I know you didn't." Meanwhile, the story was beginning to leak. Not to the public, not yet. But within the tight circles of royal staff, whispers spread. The Queen Consort had been turned away from Royal Lodge. A guard had defied her. Sides were being chosen. Some staff members admired Thomas. Quietly, privately, they respected his courage. Others thought he was a fool. You don't defy the Queen Consort and survive. Inside Royal Lodge, Andrew became aware of Thomas's situation through Margaret. They're going to fire him, she reported. The disciplinary hearing is a formality. The decision is already made. Andrew felt anger rise in his chest. This man had protected his legal rights, and now he would lose everything for it. Set up a meeting, Andrew said. I want to speak with Thomas. 2 days later, Thomas entered Royal Lodge for the first time in 12 years of service. He had always been outside, at the gate, watching. Never inside, the grandeur struck him immediately. The high ceilings, the artwork, the sense of history in every room. This was what he had been protecting. Andrew met him in the library. The two men stood awkwardly for a moment, Andrew said, gesturing to a chair. Thomas sat. Uncomfortable in the presence of royalty, despite his years of service. I'm aware of your situation, Andrew began. The hearing, the threat to your employment, it's because of me. Because you followed the law. I followed my duty, sir. Your duty's going to cost you your pension, your livelihood. Thomas said nothing. What could he say? It was true. Andrew leaned forward. I want to help. I can write a letter, speak on your behalf at the hearing. With respect, sir, that would only make things worse. If you defend me, they'll say I'm your agent, that I acted on your orders rather than legal principle. Andrew knew he was right. Anything Andrew did would be twisted, used against Thomas. Then what can I do? Andrew asked, and there was genuine pain in his voice. How do I make this right? Thomas looked at the prince directly. You survive, sir. You keep this house. You don't let them push you out. Because if you leave, if you give up, then what I did meant nothing. My career will have ended for nothing. The words hung in the air between them. Andrew nodded slowly. I'll fight. I promise you that. The promises were easier than money. Money was what Andrew didn't have. His attempts to secure funding for the mansion's repairs had failed. Banks wouldn't loan to him. Not with his reputation. Friends had distanced themselves. Even his own family had turned cold. Except for one person, Sarah Ferguson, his ex-wife. Still lived with him at Royal Lodge. Their relationship was complicated, undefined, but she had never abandoned him. And she had connections Andrew had lost. Let me make some calls, Sarah said when Andrew explained the situation. I know people. People who owe me favors. Sarah, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. She spent the next week reaching out to old contacts. Wealthy friends from her charity work. Business associates. Anyone who might help? Most said no. But a few listened, and slowly, impossibly, a plan began to form. Meanwhile, Thomas's disciplinary hearing approached. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Mary watched him grow thinner, more worried. Whatever happens, she told him, I'm proud of you. We might lose the house, he said. Then we'll find a smaller one. But we won't lose who we are. The night before the hearing, Thomas sat in his garden and looked up at the stars. He had served the crown his entire adult life. He had believed in duty, in order, in the rule of law. Now that belief was going to destroy him, but he still couldn't bring himself to regret it. Some things were worth more than security. Some things were worth fighting for, even when you knew you would lose. Tomorrow would come. The hearing would happen, and Thomas would face whatever came with his head held high, even if it cost him everything. Asterisk. The hearing took place in a windowless room at Windsor Castle. 3 officials sat behind a long table, the head of royal security, the deputy master of the household, and a representative from human resources. Thomas entered alone. He had declined union representation, knowing it wouldn't matter. This wasn't about facts. It was about power. The head of security, a stern man named Colonel Davies. Opened a folder. Mr. Porter, he began. You are accused of insubordination and failure to follow direct orders from a senior member of the royal family. Specifically, you refused entry to Her Majesty the Queen Consort on the morning of November 3rd. How do you respond? Thomas kept his voice steady. I followed the legal terms of the Duke of York's lease agreement. The lease grants the Duke exclusive authority over who may enter the property. The Queen Consort was not on the authorized list. The Queen Consort requires no authorization, the HR representative said sharply. She is second only to His Majesty in authority. With respect, authority is not the same as legal access. The lease is a binding contract. Colonel Davies leaned forward. Mr. Porter, do you understand the severity of your actions? You embarrassed a senior royal. You created a diplomatic incident. Your behavior reflects poorly on the entire security apparatus. I prevented a potential breach of contract, Thomas replied. Had I allowed unauthorized entry, the Duke could have claimed security failed to uphold the terms of his agreement. The three officials exchanged glances. Thomas had clearly thought through his defense, but it didn't matter. Your employment is terminated effective immediately, Colonel Davies said. You will surrender your credentials and vacate your post by end of day. Your pension will be calculated based on years served with appropriate deductions. Thomas felt the words hit him like a physical blow. Deductions? For the disruption caused? Standard policy and terminations for cause. They were taking money from his pension, money he had earned over decades of loyal service. Thomas stood. May I speak freely? You no longer work here, Mr. Porter. You may say whatever you wish. I have served the Crown for 38 years. I have been loyal, dedicated, and honest. I followed the law because that's what I was trained to do. And you're punishing me because I inconvenienced someone powerful? Thomas's voice grew stronger. This isn't about security or protocol. This is about revenge. And history will remember that. He turned and walked out before they could respond. Outside the room, his legs shook. His eyes burned, but he didn't cry. Not there. Not where they could see. The news of Thomas's firing spread quickly through the royal staff. Some expressed quiet sympathy. Others avoided eye contact, afraid of association. But one person took notice in a different way. Prince William heard about the situation through his own security detail. He listened to the story with growing discomfort. A guard was fired for enforcing a legal lease. He asked, Yes, sir? The Queen Consort's office requested his termination. William was quiet for a long moment. He and Camilla had a complicated relationship. She was his father's wife, but she would never be his mother. And lately her ambitions had become increasingly visible. This is wrong, William said quietly. Sir? Firing a man for doing his job correctly. For following the law? That's not how we should operate. His age shifted uncomfortably. With respect, sir, speaking out could create friction with the Queen Consort. William looked out the window. Some things are worth the friction. Later that day, William made a phone call. Not to Camilla or his father. To his lawyer. I want to understand something, William said. This lease my uncle has on Royal Lodge, it's legitimate? Completely, sir. Signed by the late Queen and ratified by His Majesty. And a guard was fired for enforcing it. So I understand. William was quiet. Is there any way to help this guard? Legally? You could offer to cover the pension deductions. Make him whole financially. Anonymously. It can be arranged.
Do it!
The lawyer paused. Sir, if the Queen Consort learns of this, then she'll be angry with me. I can live with that. 3 days later, Thomas received a letter. Inside was a check that covered the exact amount of his pension deductions, plus an additional sum for his legal expenses. The letter was unsigned, but it bore a watermark Thomas recognized. The Prince of Wales's office. Thomas sat at his kitchen table, staring at the check. Mary stood behind him, her hand on his shoulder. Someone saw, she whispered. Someone cared, Thomas nodded, unable to speak. At Royal Lodge, Andrew received different news. Sarah had succeeded. Through her network of contacts, she had secured funding for the mansion's immediate repairs. Not all $7 million, but enough to address the critical issues. Enough to prove Andrew was meeting his obligations. How did you do it? Andrew asked, amazed. Sarah smiled. I reminded people that loyalty is a two-way street. That you stood by me when I had my own scandals. That families protect each other, even when it's hard. Andrew felt tears in his eyes. I don't deserve you. No, Sarah agreed with a laugh. You probably don't. But you have me anyway. The funds were transferred. Contractors were hired. The Royal Lodge would survive. And in Windsor, Thomas Porter began his retirement earlier than planned. The check from William's office had saved him from financial ruin. But more than that, it had restored something he thought he'd lost. His faith that doing the right thing still mattered. That honor still existed, even in places that seemed to have forgotten it. But the story wasn't over, because Camilla had not forgotten, had not forgiven, and her next move would change everything. 2 months after Thomas's firing, the story finally broke publicly. A journalist from a major newspaper received an anonymous tip about the confrontation at Royal Lodge. Details were provided: dates, times, names. Someone wanted the world to know what had happened. The headline read, "Queen Consort denied entry to royal property in dramatic standoff." Within hours, it was everywhere. Social media exploded. News channels picked it up. The public, already fascinated by royal drama, devoured every detail. But the response wasn't what Camilla had expected. Instead of outrage at Andrew or support for Camilla, the public rallied behind Thomas. He became an unlikely hero, a guard who stood up to power, an ordinary man who refused to bend the rules, even for a queen. Finally, someone with a backbone. One viral tweet read, "Now this is what integrity looks like." Commentators praised his adherence to the law. Legal experts appeared on television explaining that Thomas had acted correctly. Even critics of Andrew admitted that the lease was legitimate, that personal feelings couldn't override legal documents. Camilla watched the coverage with growing fury. This was supposed to make Andrew look bad. Instead, it made her look petty, vengeful, and above the law. King Charles called her to his study. "We need to discuss this," he said quietly. Camilla's defenses rose immediately. "It was a private matter. Someone leaked it to damage me." "Was Thomas Porter wrong?" Charles asked, legally. "Was he wrong to deny you entry?" Camilla hesitated. "The lease is technically valid, but then he wasn't wrong. He followed the law, and we fired him for it. He embarrassed me." Charles looked at his wife with tired eyes. "And now we've embarrassed ourselves. The public sees us as bullies, as people who punish those who won't bend to our will." "Andrew shouldn't have that house," Camilla insisted. "After everything he's done, Mother gave it to him," Charles interrupted. "She wanted him protected. I signed those papers honoring her wishes. We can't simply undo that because it's inconvenient, so we do nothing." Charles sighed. "We accept that some battles aren't worth fighting, that some things are beyond our control." Camilla left the meeting furious, but she knew the battle was lost. Public opinion, the legal standing, even Charles's support had turned against her at Royal Lodge. Andrew read the news coverage with mixed emotions. Vindication felt hollow. The public now understood his legal right to the property, but they also remembered why he was there in the first place. The scandals, the shame, the fall from grace. "You've won," Sarah told him. "They can't force you out now." "Have I?" Andrew asked. "I'm still a pariah, still isolated. I have the house, but I've lost everything else. You have your daughters. You have me. You have your dignity." Andrew looked at her. "Do I? Or am I just clinging to the last thing no one can take from me?" Sarah sat beside him. "Maybe that's enough. Maybe survival is its own kind of victory." Across town, Thomas watched the news coverage from his cottage. Strangers recognized him on the street now. Some thanked him. Others wanted photos. He'd become accidentally famous. "How does it feel?" Mary asked. "Being vindicated?" Thomas thought about it. "Strange. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it was right, and now everyone knows that. But I still lost my job. Still retired earlier than planned." Mary squeezed his hand. "But you kept your integrity. That's worth more than any career." 2 weeks later, Thomas received an unexpected visitor. Prince William appeared at his door without announcement, with only a single protection officer. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas stammered, shocked. "May I come in?" William asked. They sat in Thomas's modest living room, an awkward contrast of royalty and ordinary life. "I wanted to thank you personally," William said, "for doing what was right, even when it was difficult." "I was just following the lease terms, sir. You're following your principles. That's rarer than it should be." William paused. "I also wanted to apologize. The way you were treated was unacceptable. The firing, the pension deductions, that's not who we should be." "You sent the check," Thomas said, to make up the difference. William nodded. I did. And I want you to know that if you ever need anything, you contact my office directly. You have my word. After William left, Thomas sat in silence. Mary came and sat beside him. A prince came to our house, she said, still processing it. A good man came to our house, Thomas corrected. That's what matters. In the months that followed, the situation settled into an uneasy equilibrium. Andrew remained at Royal Lodge, the repairs funded by Sarah's network. Camilla stopped her attempts to force him out, realizing the political cost was too high. Thomas lived his retirement quietly, refusing interviews despite constant media requests. But the story had changed something fundamental. It had reminded the public that laws apply to everyone, that ordinary people can stand up to extraordinary power, that doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, matters. Late one evening, Andrew stood in the gardens of Royal Lodge, looking up at the mansion. In the distance, he could see the gate where Thomas had made his stand. Thank you, Andrew whispered to the night, for remembering that I'm still a person under the law, that I still have rights, even if I've lost everything else. The house stood behind him, solid and secure. His sanctuary, his last piece of dignity. Protected by a lease agreement and the courage of one guard who believed that rules meant something. Camilla had tried to reclaim the Royal Lodge. She had used her power, her influence, her authority. But she had learned a hard truth that night at the gates. Some things can't be reclaimed through force. Some things belong to the people who hold the legal keys, regardless of power or position. The keys belonged to the Duke of York, and no queen could change that. In the end, it wasn't about who deserved what. It wasn't about scandals or public opinion. It was about the simple, powerful principle that the law applies to everyone equally. Even princes, even queens, even guards who refused to back down. That was the lesson of Royal Lodge, and it was a lesson no one involved would ever forget.